And hello everybody in YouTube. I'll be starting shortly. Thank you for coming. I'll start at about 5 after, and then I'll do my thank yous and everything. Welcome to everybody joining in YouTube. I'll be starting shortly. Gonna give it about another 2 or 3 minutes. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I will be turning off the music once I start. Just one more minute. Hello, Luke, over in YouTube. I'll be starting shortly. And actually starting right about now. So let me mute my music. Okay. First, we're going to get the opening remarks out of the way. Welcome, everyone. To begin, I would like to thank the following people for getting me to this point. First, my friend Chaz, who encouraged me to keep writing, went so far as to put his own artwork out there to help me set up my first publication, Adventurers Digest, How Not to Crawl in a Dungeon. Next, my mom. Love you, Mom. She has always encouraged my imagination and writing all my life. Special thanks to YouTuber Detective Elite Prime. Elite inspired the idea to do this live event in QA after I attended one of his QAs that he hosted after a weekly YouTube stream. Finally, I would like to thank you all for attending my live launch event. All of you here are why storytellers like myself do what we do. Thank you so much. Please listen to the following disclaimer. This is a work of historical fiction. The language and actions by my characters in this book are based off of the research into the era of the early 1900s. Please be aware this book is by no means based in modern politically correct terms or behaviors. Please remember this while listening to the selection provided by me. And now let's begin. I'm going to be reading from my book, William Scomp Recovery and Detective Services, Das Erste Grimoire. Prologue. He was just another guest speaker. I hadn't even planned to go to the lecture hall that day. I certainly didn't care about listening to another sullen old man. He was just getting to tell us how important it was for us to learn what we were being taught and help fight the Nazis and Nips. They already trotted out 3 others that month, yammering on about the greatness of serving our country, how we were the future. 1 or 2 I wouldn't have minded, but the last one didn't even seem to believe the line he was paid to feed us. Any student who had bought into their spiel had already enlisted and would be leaving at the end of the semester. 4 in 1 month was beginning to border on cruel and unusual punishment. This newest one didn't even sound like a war veteran. William Hartung Scomp, a private detective, art recovery expert, and local paranormal bigwig. Anyone who had lived in the city for more than a year or 2 had heard of him. To most of us, it just seemed as if they had run out of real veterans or local heroes from the Great War and were hauling in local celebrities to talk to us. 300 students filled the lecture hall, members of the graduating class and a few of the more exceptional undergraduates from the Arcane Studies program. Most of us were talking among ourselves, wondering why another government lackey needed to talk to us. We weren't troubling ourselves over much about the grandstanding of another military spokesman. Most of us were gathering in small groups discussing the most recent images from The Front, which movie starlet had been seen at that club with that actor or director, or which flick we were going to go see that weekend. The doors to the lecture hall opened. Most of us turned to scrutinize a man who would be boring us for the next hour or so. He would have been a big man in his prime, 6 foot, 6'1", easy. He obviously came from Celtic lineage, with Germanic or Nordic heritage added in for that average American look. He had a large build, broad-shouldered, and barrel-chested. His stomach at one point might have been flat, but he was certainly showing a noteworthy potbelly. He walked into the lecture hall with a very pronounced limp and was using a walking stick, an actual stick as tall as he was, not a cane. His shoulders were hunched slightly. It gave him the almost deformed physique. His beard was the color of raven's feathers, with distinct white hairs framing his mouth and chin. He had trimmed it short, shaved from underneath his chin, but not his cheeks. His tattered gray fedora covered more black hair. It hung in lank curls almost to his shoulders, which gave him a very shabby appearance. Along with the gray suit he was wearing, his long coat appeared to have once been very high quality, and had long ago seen better days. Overall, the man did not give the impression of being a well-respected, accomplished detective and arcane master. The man before us, stomping back and forth in front of the lectern, looked more like a vagrant down on his luck and deep in a bottle. I amused myself by looking around the hall, assessing how the others were reacting to his appearance. Most of the assembled students went back to their discussions, although in much more hushed tones. As I said, many of us were essentially tired of the down with Tojo and Himmler Uncle Sam wants you speeches. This man before us unquestionably did not impress us. My attention got quickly redirected to the front of the hall, though, when he attempted to get the attention of the room. He started with a polite cough to clear his throat and indicate his intention to begin speaking. It sounded like he had not used his voice in years. A few of us began to pay attention, but as I said, we were not that impressed by him. I would say we intended to be entertained by the attempts of this down-and-out drunkard trying to talk to us. He quite dramatically and shockingly ended that entertainment by drawing a very large revolver. It began to glow intensely, as if in displeasure at the lack of respect being shown to its owner, one Mr. William Heart-Tongue Scomp. A number of the young ladies in attendance, who actually had been paying attention, screamed very shrilly and startled enough of the other students for them to look towards the front of the lecture hall, where they saw that Mr. Scomp had leveled what appeared to be a stylized, glowing, and smoking Colt 45 revolver directly at the back of the hall. The engravings on the metal barrel and body of the gun were glowing a blinding green, as the barely visible carvings on the wooden grip traced an orange glow through Mr. Scomp's aged fingers, palm, and the back of his hand. The hammer seemed to pull back in slow motion, as Mr. Scomp pulled the trigger in a steady and controlled motion, showing years of practice. The orange glow flowed into the hammer as the green glow drained into the chamber coming underneath it. The crack of the hammer hitting its intended target sounded like a thunderclap throughout the lecture hall. Few of us were still in our seats as the hammer fell. The ones that were still seated watched as what looked like a churning green and orange boat flare rocketed up the aisle and splashed against the back wall of the lecture hall. We all stared. A number of us watched the light, and maybe a better word would be the energy, blaze outward from the impact and around all the doors and bricks connecting behind the dais. That should ensure that we're not disturbed as I talk to you. Mr. Scomp holstered his revolver. He turned his back on everyone, walked to the back of the dais, took hold of one of the chairs lined up along the wall, and dragged it, quite noisily, near the edge of the dais. He sat down a little heavily, taking a deep breath as he did, huffing it out in a deep sigh. Damn thing is heavier than it looked. Must be made of red oak. Mr. Scomp cleared his throat once again. The cough echoed around the lecture hall. People got up off the floor and resumed their chairs, now completely focused on Mr. William Heart-Tongue Scomp. Right. I'm here today to tell you my experiences with the Army and dealings with the Nazis. It is a useless exercise. Everyone's time is different and the same. It is all in how well you deal with it all. It is scary. It is tedious. What little pleasure is to be found is fleeting and should be treasured. It can be one of the most laborious experiences for anyone with a lick of sense. Out of all of that, all I can tell you as a veteran of the Great War is trust the men who have either been there before, the veterans, or the survivors who have shown the ability to roll with the punches. Sir? John, a member of our academic academy and arcane arts class, stood up while raising his hand. Sir, that isn't what the other men told us. John was one of the class who had already enlisted. After the first guest speaker had ended his speech, he was leaving at the end of the semester. Those other men were paid to come here and other universities and colleges up and down the eastern seaboard and tell you all that stuff. Mr. Scomp leaned forward in his chair, looking for all the world as if he couldn't quite see John, squinting at him, and tilting his head just a little to the left. Let me guess. Eagle Scout? Leaving just as soon as the semester ends? John grinned sheepishly as he lowered his hand. Recovering steadily, he stood up a little straighter. John appeared to take a regimental parade stance. Yes, sir. I'm glad you recognize that I'm a patriot and that I'm a member of the prestigious group of dedicated young Americans. Son, I see the arrow of a boy, trying to prove he's a man. I hope that your time in service doesn't ruin the potential I see. Mr. Scomp sat back slowly, both effectively and definitively dismissing John. Let me explain why I'm here. I'm here to determine if any of you have the potential to learn the arcane arts beyond an academic exercise. That is why your teacher is not here. Why I've sealed the room to keep everyone else out. A few grumbles and exclamations of stark surprise escaped a number of the students. Yes, I know you are all students of the arcane, but not all of you are capable of actually implementing what can be taught. I do not want to hear arguments to the contrary. How many of you actually saw me seal the room? Or did many of you see me point a fancy-looking revolver at the back of the wall and pull the trigger on an empty chamber? Mr. Scomp barely waited for any of us to raise our hands, treating what he said as more of an expression of doubt than a question to the assembled group of students. The arcane is just like many predetermined skills. It's like being left-handed. 1 in 10 people are left-handed. The ratio is somewhat higher for arcane, say 1 in 5. But people have varying levels of skill aptitude. A lot of people have the aptitude, but some people are just able to channel the skill with less difficulty. And since all of you have elected to begin studying already, the government believes that most, if not all of you, already have a high aptitude for the arcane. Just as many scientists are being drafted for a number of government projects, any of you with the right kind of potential would be drafted as well. The government has designated that project as the Salem Project. Everyone began to shift in their seats. No one thought that any of the guest speakers would be talking about the draft, at least not the government project sense of the word. Mr. Scomp scanned the room slowly, taking in all of their faces. He didn't appear to be enjoying this any more than we were. A few of the women were vocally objecting to being drafted. No one here is going to be drafted into the military in the military sense of the word. The government is only going to be using your talents for defense of our shores. The Army, Navy, and Marines are conducting their own testing. Anyone here that shows the right potential would be part of a civilian defense, effectively part of the National Guard. Mr. Scomp paused a moment and looked towards the desk where our teacher normally sat, while not at the lectern. Professor Winters tells me that you are competent with formulae and focus and with the philosophical theory behind arcane practices. I'm going to provide a series of tests to see how competent you all are. There are 3 essentials to any spell: form, intent, and willpower. Mr. Scomp glanced around at the gathered students, seeing whether any of us would contradict him. But before anyone could, he continued with a self-assured nod. Some of you may not hear it referred to in that way. Some may know physical, mental, and emotional. It is basically all the same thing. Form is for the most part what it sounds like. You need something to focus the spell through, a physical form. That can be many things. A staff. He reached out with his right hand, and the walking stick he had left next to the lectern sailed to his hand with a meaty smack. A spell, a potion, anything that within the practitioner's mind is going to hold the energy that you're releasing. For our purposes, we're going to use my walking stick. I crafted it from a lightning-struck dogwood tree from my own yard. There are carved seagulls up and down its length. Some are personal, some are different representations of the 5 elements. While Mr. Scomp explained all this to us, he held up his walking stick, and the different carvings lit up as he mentioned them, going down the list of different ancient languages commonly used in arcane spell formulae: Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Norse, Celtic, Germanic, cuneiform, and so forth. Intent is little more complicated. With some things, your intent is already dictated by the form you're going to use. Love spells, healing potions, shield charms, or a flying carpet. Mr. Scomp's voice trailed off, waiting for the few dispersed giggles to subside. Those kinds of items define their intent, and generally have set formulae to follow that have been around for millennia. Intent is defining what you want to do within the arcane and requires the most ingenuity and imagination. The more imaginative you are, the more fluid of thought and idea you can be, the better at creating with the arcane you can be. And the inverse is true. The more rigid of thought, the more closed-minded to new concepts and ideas you are, the harder it will be for you to create on the fly or in the spirit of the moment. Intent requires you to decide what you want to do and then formulating a form into which you plan to focus that want. Mr. Scomp again directed his and our attention upon his walking stick, holding it in both hands across his palms and rolling it slowly back and forth. Some claim that you should decide your intent before you pick a form. That decision is entirely up to you. I only list them in order of importance from least to greatest to me. The walking stick was rolling back and forth horizontally across Scomp's palms faster and faster. He just watched it for a few moments. Then he pulled his hands out from under it. The walking stick continued to roll back and forth through the air exactly where he had been holding it. The last thing needed to perform any kind of arcane act is willpower. Above all else, without the will to say, "It shall be so," the arcane user will be nothing more than a theorist. Mr. Scomp pushed back his chair and stood up. He proceeded to the steps of the dais. I could quite easily leave this room, return home, and then come back here tomorrow night, and that stick would still be moving back and forth in the air, unless, at that point, he singled out one of the three assembled students. Any of you can walk up there and cause it to stop. End of prologue. Chapter 1, The Bar. I was still a bit awestruck after Mr. Scomp's lecture and challenge, so much so I followed him with some vague plan of getting him to let me be his sidekick, pupil, apprentice, or assistant. I trailed him for over an hour, moving down out of University of Pennsylvania's campus across South Street Bridge and into South Philadelphia. We eventually ended up at a corner bar and restaurant in the Italian market. Mr. Scomp headed down into the basement away from the dining tables and casual patrons, into what most likely would be the locals only section of the bar. He headed past the far end of the bar towards the booths along the back wall near the kitchen entrance. He crossed the smoky bar as if he belonged, casually avoiding flamboyantly extended hands and arms of the regulars as they just gestured and argued among themselves about the lousy Krauts or the corruption of baseball by the creation of a women's league and other common bar conversations in Philadelphia. I was caught off guard by a waitress, stepping between me and a table of burly patrons for a matter of moments. Mr. Scomp appeared to vanish into smoke and the noise of the bar. Looking around the room probably made me stand out a bit. I fervently hoped he had only taken a seat. I really wanted to catch him before he could actually disappear. I finally found him seated in a booth near a decently sized stage in the far corner of the bar, almost opposite to the direction I saw him moving just moments before. I hurried across the rest of the bar and stood at the corner of the table, waiting for him to acknowledge my presence. "Sit down, kid. It's obvious none of my evasion techniques or muddling charms work on you. So whatever you're here for, just spit it out and leave me alone." Mrs. Scomp did not look up or even raise his head during the entire statement. It wasn't until I had seated myself and placed my bag on the bench beside me that he raised his head. "Good. You're at least old enough to buy my beer and whiskey." Mr. Scomp raised his left arm and made a flicking motion with his hand. I watched eagerly for any show of power he might be conjuring. He chuckled roughly as he noticed my zeal and said, "Relax, kid. I'm just getting the waitress's attention." I waited patiently as the waitress took Mr. Scomp's order. She smiled at me and asked if I wanted a drink. Mr. Scomp's gaze shifted from her to me in a mild glare. I quickly realized that, unbeknownst to the waitress, she had just given Mr. Scomp a way to test me, which he efficiently took full advantage. I swallowed a sudden lump in my throat and ordered a beer and asked for dinner menus for Mr. Scomp and myself. The waitress repeated our orders. Mr. Scomp grunted in acknowledgement and nodded nervously. I nodded nervously. She smiled at me again and winked as she went to get our drinks and some menus. What do you want, kid? I would really like to become your apprentice, Mr. Scomp. I tried to sound confident and sincere, more or less realizing as I squeaked and strained my way through the statement that he could probably see my true intentions through my aura, just like John's during the lecture. Kid, I don't want an apprentice. Right now, I wouldn't know what to do with one if I had one. Give it up, kid. Finish college, start a business, get married. I don't care what you do, as long as you forget this idea of becoming some kind of hero. All I could do was stare at him. He had declared in one blistering little sentence exactly what I hoped he could teach me to be. After the displays of the arcane power during the lecture and the walking stick test, I had started to dredge up memories I had of his old radio interviews and the stories we all heard as kids about the magic detective. I'd remembered how fantastical his cases had been, published and broadcast on Saturday night gumshoe radio. I wanted to be like him, not just another GI whiz that most of the American kids wanted to be, but something unique, something different, a true wizard. I want to learn from you, Mr. Scomp. I want to know how to do all the stuff I've heard you can do. He cut through my statement with one swift sweep of his hand in front of me. An orange haze floated from behind his hand as he made the move, catching my attention even more than the tips of his fingers ghosting past the tip of my nose. Join the army, kid. I taught all I could to the Army's arcane squads. The rest is just panic and survival instinct. The waitress arrived with our drinks and menus. She just smiled and nodded at me. I'll give you gentlemen some time to decide. And she turned and walked away from Mr. Scomp before Mr. Scomp could object. He took a deep breath and picked up his glass. Scotch. There's only one thing smoother. More scotch. Mr. Scomp then shot back what I would have considered at least a 4-nip drink. Nothing smoother. He purposely set the glass down and waved to the waitress again. Do you really want to know how to be what I am? With more determination than you could truly appreciate, Mr. Scomp, it's Bill. Excuse me, sir? Bill. My name is Bill. You're not a client. We're not in a classroom. And you're not a cop. Call me Bill. Never call me Mr. Scomp or sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Bill. Bill nodded at me. Fine. You pay for dinner. I'll tell you what I went through to become what fate has made me. What can I get you? The waitress settled her left elbow on her hip and held a pencil at the ready above her notepad. Chapter 2, The Boss. I just picked up my glass of scotch. On the stage was a very tall man strumming away at an upright bass while Kate sang. It was the spring of 1932. I only showed up at places like the Boss's Speakeasy on nights Kate was going to sing. Irish-born, she was a beauty, and her voice had a natural ability to carry and find all the deepest parts of a bistro or speakeasy. This particular one was run by an Italian, hiding it 2 floors beneath his furniture store. It wasn't one of the hippest spots in Philadelphia, but it was very rarely raided, and the boss prided himself on that distinction. I was just about to settle into my glass and an evening of listening to some breezy jazz when 2 very big, very Italian gentlemen wearing nice tweed suits stepped up behind me. One wearing a bowler hat reached out and placed a very meaty hand under my right arm. The man on my left grabbed the bar stool I was sitting on, quickly pulled it out from under me. Bowler hat's hand was the only thing that kept me from shattering my jaw and teeth on the brass rail of the bar. But he did spill my scotch. You're coming with us, Bowler Hat turned me towards the back of the bar. I saw no point in getting thrashed by a couple of Guidos, especially when I hadn't even been told why I was going to get thrashed yet. I knew a lot less about the Mafia then. A lot of people know everything and nothing about the Mafia. It took a few too many poundings for me to realize that most bullies will give for one of 2 reasons. They like doing it, or they find it to be the fastest way to get a point across. The most and most mafia enforcers were just bullies with better suits. It was what they got paid for. I'm no angel when it comes to meting out violence, but I have always believed that I had good reason before I started. I've met a few enforcers who would get a little carried away when bringing someone in to see their boss. The two thugs high-stepped me through a couple of doors and down a few smoky, low-lit hallways to a very formidable-looking oak door. Bowler Hat knocked twice before opening the door and dragging me through behind him. I tried to take in as much of what appeared to be an office as quickly as possible. My chaperones weren't preventing me from taking a good look around, so I made every attempt to soak up the environment. You can learn a lot from where a man works. Feel the aura of a personal spaces anytime you can. It could save your life when it comes down to moods and how personalities clash. The two Guidos guided me around a couple of finely made leather-upholstered reception chairs and thrust me down into one, which sat before a well-pointed desk. Sit. Stay. Guido number 2 commanded before walking to stand beside the second door to the left of him behind the desk. Woof, woof. I couldn't help myself. I was feeling slightly belligerent towards Guido 2. Guido 1, or Bowler Hat, as I decided to dub him, had only spilled my scotch. Guido 2 would probably have gladly shattered my jaw off that bar. As I said, some of the hired muscle really liked being the muscle. Just a little too much. We waited for about 5 minutes, Bowler Hat at my right elbow and Guido 2 standing by the only other door, with me seated in a very nice leather armchair, becoming increasingly more nervous. As I said, I only came to that particular speakeasy when Kate was singing, and I had not had any dealings with the true mob at that point in my career as a private dick, retrieval man, or arcane practitioner. The man that eventually came through that second door was obviously the man in charge. 3-piece gray pinstripe pinstripe suit. A cigar held between the ring and middle finger of his right hand. He was well groomed, even aristocratic in his appearance. I was at once impressed, awed, and intimidated by the man that sat down behind the desk in front of me. "This is the guy, boss," Guido provided. "So, you're the private investigator, William Harttongue Scomp." The boss took a heavy pull off his cigar to accentuate his statement. "Bill, please. Only my late mother, police, and judges called me by my full name, and I don't think I'm in that kind of trouble." A large plume of smoke puffed out of the boss's mouth as a smirk ghosted across his lips. He casually reached across his desk, hooked a glass, or possibly fine crystal ashtray with his pointer finger, and drew it in closer to himself. He knocked the cigar against the ashtray twice before bringing it back to his lips to take another pull off of it, the entire time observing me closely. At no time during all of his actions did he take his eyes off me. "All right, gentlemen, I believe Bill and I have a few things to discuss, the least of which is why a PI and recovery man is in my joint." The boss flicked the fingers on his right hand, not occupied with his cigar, shooing Guido 2 and Bowler Hat towards the door he had originally entered through. The boss's gaze did not waver off me for at least a count of 10 after his enforcers had left the room. "All right, Mr. Scomp, what makes you think you're not in that kind of trouble?" I crossed my legs, clasped my hands, and set them on top of my knees. "Actually, it's more a feeling than actual knowledge. If I understand who, or more accurately, what you are, then if I were in that kind of trouble, then we'd be meeting in a completely different kind of room. I would guess one not so close to the main part of the club. I'm thinking one with only one real door, and probably at least one more floor down with easier access to the sewers. And I feel that there may have been a chair for me, but it wouldn't be as nice as this one." I took my hands off my knees and patted them both on the arms of the chair. I'll admit now that I was probably a little too cocky for the situation I found myself in. But overall, For being pretty new to dealing with a man of the boss's type, I felt I had done quite well. I could have been a little less flippant, maybe a little more gracious about the fact that I wasn't tied to a chair about to be worked over like a side of fresh beef. I also feel if I had been any less of an ass to the boss, I never would have earned his respect and eventually would have ended up as a worked over rack of ribs or proverbial side of beef. My gall must have either annoyed or impressed the boss enough to keep keeping me from the beating I feared. The boss laughed once. I like you, kid. Bill, you've got moxie. Good thing I need you right now, because if I had been any other time and a private dick had shown up in my joint unannounced and had that kind of attitude, it would have ended your career. The boss took another drag off his cigar. I need you for a job. I noticed you come here a few times a month. Is there something special about my place that you like? I had trouble keeping up with some of the boss's abrupt changes in line of thought. I must have appeared fairly slow-witted, and that, of course, is never a good thing. Excuse me. I don't mean to sound less than impressed by your presence, but could you repeat that part before the last question? I need you for a job, but we're going to leave that for a little bit. I get to know my employees more before I start working with them. Now, other than our excellent scotch, what brings you to my establishment most Saturday and Tuesday nights? I never asked him outright, which would have been rude, but I'm fairly sure he already knew why I frequented his gin joint. It didn't think it would hurt for him to have confirmation that I liked one of his singers. Kate. Kate? The boss seemed to be truly puzzled by my statement. He must have assumed I would lie, or at least make my answer more vague. His brows drew down into a severe frown. With the smoke slowly escaping his nostrils, he distinctly reminded me of a storm giant I had dealt with in the Poconos. The narrow-backed bird that was singing earlier? Yes, sir. I discovered her one night while tracking a wayward husband who had decided to see if the grass was greener on the other side. I smiled, remembering that first night when I had heard Kate sing. The guy took his little blonde thing to a club in Germantown, and Kate was performing. I got so distracted listening to her that I almost lost my mark when he decided to head out for a second dessert. The boss smiled a bit of a knowing smile. He either appreciated my view of Kate singing or appreciated the idea of a second dessert. I'm not sure if he wanted me to explain more, so I resolutely decided to hold my tongue until he started speaking again. The boss didn't leave me wondering for long. A quick glance at his desk clock and then the door I had been brought through pulled him out of his nostalgia. Well, that tells me you have a keen appreciation of both music and women. Two things I value highly myself. The job I need you to perform for me has something to do with a woman. My wife and I'm sorry. I really don't like interrupting you, and I certainly would never believe you would use a PI to do work that any of your men are probably more accomplished at, but I strictly deal with thefts and reacquisition now. Cutting off someone, especially someone who obviously well placed in the Philly mob, was probably not one of my more brilliant ideas. But as I said before, I was young and inexperienced with dealing with them. The boss seemed to take this into account because he didn't have me left in an alley down by the waterfront. Bill, I need you to recover a piece of jewelry. It was stolen from my home while I was out with my wife, hence referring to my wife when I began to speak. The boss paused at that moment and waited to see if I would interrupt him again. I earned a few points of wisdom at this point by keeping my trap shut. The necklace was stolen from my place. It was a very important necklace, very noticeable, very prominent. A lot of people would notice if my wife stopped wearing it. The boss took another long pull off his cigar. Now, I'm not sure if that is the actual intent of the theft or if the thief just recognized the worth of the piece. It was not the only thing he stole. The rest of it is not important. Either way, I need that string of ice back. and I want to meet the person who stole it. So you want to hire me to recover the lost necklace? Can I ask why? I'm guessing you have more contacts than I do within the criminal network. I'm fairly sure you could find out which fences have taken that kind of merchandise in the last... By the way, when was this necklace stolen? The boss grimaced, blew more smoke out of his nostrils, and ground his cigarette out. Last night. I figure it will be at least 24 hours from about 8 this morning before questioning the fences would do you any good. But boss opened the middle drawer of his desk and pulled out a yellow ledger pad. Here's a list of the fences that deal with merchandise you'll be looking for. If I hear that any of these men have been raided by the cops in the next 48 hours, I will take it very badly. The boss scratched his way through a quick list of operations that dealt with stolen merchandise for cash fences. He finished his statement and list with a quick jab at the bottom of the page. He slid the list across the desktop towards me. I have no issue with you requesting information from the bulls, just allowing them to use my information. The break-in was very professional. If he hadn't stolen from me, I would hire him myself. But the boss just held out his hands. Now the thief's talents are a curse. Positively. The bundler scaled the trellis outside of my third-story bedroom, picked the latch, snaked his way in, rummaged a few drawers in my dresser, and didn't take anything. I don't keep anything worth anything in there, so he moved on to my wife's things. Took 2 gold chains, a few sets of her pearl earrings, and this. The boss dug a folded piece of newsprint out of his breast pocket and spread it out on the desktop. The string of diamonds would have put many a man in the pauper's house and raised even the most homely house marm to Corinne Griffith's status. I whistled appreciatively. Sir? Are you sure you don't want someone along to make sure? Well, honestly, that is some very heavy ice. No. The boss sat back heavily, making his chair groan in complaint. A dark and definitely scarred hand rose to cover his eyes. Do you understand what it would mean within my organization if it was discovered that some random thief got away with my wife's favorite string? I would not live out the week before some young con tried to prove he could be capo of my crew. It wouldn't work, of course. Someone higher up in the family would make sure I was avenged. But what good would that really do me? I began to see his point in his plans. I would be used to cover what would be seen as his blunder, whether it was a real blunder or imagined within his world. The theft made the boss appear weak, because someone was able to enter his home and make off with a very personal possession, a very expensive and noticeable symbol of power. Going deep enough into my talent, I connected with my vision to the energy fields that make up our world. This is something practitioners of the arcane learn to do at a basic level. Some call it the third sight, the third eye, or just the sight, to help us all learn what elements are strongest in the given area before we begin casting. I plan to read the boss's aura, or more specifically, the energies that were flowing around him. The boss carried a lot of weight of his world on his conscience and will. He knew much of what this organization did was despicable and loathsome, but the Philly mob made every attempt to curb as much of the violence that was widespread in other contemporaries in Chicago and New York. As I mentioned before, the boss prided himself on the fact that his club rarely got hassled by the cops. This was as much due to his ability to curb the violence and out of the control party nature that prevailed in other clubs, as the bribes and kickbacks he paid. The boss adhered to a strict honor code, expected his men to as well, and never broke his word once given. I saw in his aura that as long as I held my word, he would hold up his. I saw this in his aura and more that didn't become clear to me till much later. I also saw one other thing. The boss was scared of something or someone. I could not get a clear picture of exactly what it was, but it had something to do with the job I was being hired to do. I decided to do something then that I had not done in front of another person in a long time. Does she wear the necklace during the day? What? Oh, no. She only wore it to dinner parties, shows, and the occasional opera. Why does that matter? Are you saying that someone within my social circle stole the necklace? I can assure you that while most of them may have the money to hire someone, most of them wouldn't hesitate to take it by force. And certainly none have the skill to climb up the side of my house and Jimmy pick the latched window, especially not hanging off the side of a 4-story building. The boss eyeballed me thoroughly. I'm sure he was trying to determine whether I was really worth the effort. Here's a bit of advice. Don't give a client the chance to question your mental state. Just move along as confidently as possible. Complete the task you have in mind and hope they don't call the men in white. Oh, and keep small bits on your person at all times. String, buttons, beads, non-denominational coins, scrap of paper, and whatever else that might possibly be used for quick charms and such. I happen to have some thread and other bric-a-brac in the pockets of my overcoat. Mostly stuff to fix the coat when I would catch buttons on door frames or occasional corner of a wall. I decided to give the boss a little insurance. I had my form. I had my intent. Now I had to hope I had the confidence needed to draw on enough will to perform real magic in front of an audience. I started off by gathering all my materials, a spool of thread, that odd button that is on the coat for no other reason than replacing the lost button on the coat, a needle out of my wallet, an old trick that my father had taught me, and finally, the news clipping showing the necklace the boss wanted me to find. I pulled off a good 3 feet of thread from the spool, doubled it over, and threaded the needle. I took a deep breath, gathered all my concentration I could, and began creating the boss's insurance policy. That's the end of chapter 2. Now, for whatever reason, my event freaking stopped in my Discord. I guess because not enough people were in it. But that's fine. You guys are here in my chat. Would you like me to go on to chapter 3, guys, or would you like to ask some questions? My chat. Would you like me to... So what's it going to be, guys? Do you want to ask some questions, or you want me to go on to the next chapter? Want me to go on to the next chapter? All right, I'll do one more chapter. This actually kind of sets up how things really got rolling for my character too. Okay, I'll go on to chapter 3, the farm. You have to understand, kid, just as I showed all of you at the lecture hall, magic is real. It isn't just the theory and the pseudoscience that they have turned it into in classrooms to make it swallowable for your average Christian scholastic society. Alchemy is all well and good, but magic is more than just turning some lead ingots into gold bars or speaking to spirits to try to define the best course of a business deal. The arcane can have some very common everyday applications. Eventually, if this war wasn't on, your studies would have led you to the realization on your own. But because mistakes were made and assumptions allowed to continue to have influence, myself and some others are now going about enforcing that realization down your collective throats. I also learned the truth during a war. I was 17. I graduated high school early so that I could join up. This would, of course, been the Great War, our first World War. I had been in the Army for almost 9 months by that time. We were beginning to enter Belgium, finally making some headway against the Huns. It was midwinter. Christmas was just around the corner. Our squad commander had decided to get us out of a snowstorm, and into this farmstead's barn and main building. We found no sign of the family or even common animals found wandering around even after farmers have fled. We moved into the farmhouse quickly and as quietly as possible. It would not have been the first time we had taken shelter in an abandoned building and found a bunch of German soldiers already camped there. This time the place was abandoned completely. We found overturned furnishings and only a few items of clothing. The farmstead was abandoned quickly. The cupboards contained nothing but scraps, although the root cellar appeared to have at least half its available space filled. I helped our sergeant open some oak casks stored against one of the walls, underneath and behind some wooden crates. The sergeant tasted the liquid inside them. They were full of a local beer or ale. We set up expecting to spend at least a good week stuck in the snow. I think our first biggest blunder was cooking in our fireplace. The smoke and the smell of some roasting cured ham we had found in the root cellar must have drawn them to us. Smells of civilization. We set up standard watches for our 2 squads. 2 men on, 8 men off. We split the farm between the 2 squads, each set on watch, taking one of the 2 floors in the farmhouse, one from each pair, checking the barn and perimeter once each hour. I will be the first to admit that maybe the sergeant and I should have told our lieutenant what we found in the casks. Shouldn't have told our lieutenant what we found in the casks. By the second night, we had become too at ease. The alcohol made it way too easy to relax. We weren't in our cups, but we weren't at our best either. We had settled into a rhythm. That was our second blunder. The third night, they attacked. It was an hour into the second watch of the night. One came through the front bay window along with glass, a cold blast of wind, and whipping snow. The second might have had more brains and came through the kitchen door. It actually used the door properly. 2 more came in behind it. 3 others followed the first through the front window shortly afterwards. The initial surprise cost the lieutenant his life. He was picked up by 2 that came through the front window. They mauled him viciously within seconds, one tearing off his right arm just below the armpit as a second snapped his neck and then his back. The third creature bludgeoned a private against the back of the head, slamming him face first into a wall before it jumped onto his back and began to bite at his neck and shoulder. The two holding the lieutenant's remains began to feed off their pieces almost immediately. The others began to attack the rest of the men. We started grabbing our rifles and whatever else was at hand. Chair fragments, combat knives, sidearms. One of our men even grabbed a rolling pin off the kitchen counter and began using it as a club. Their appearance might have been what shocked us the most. They were long-limbed, more or less ape-like. They wore a mismatch of apparel, everything from pieces of plate armor, chainmail, leather vests, red coat jackets, Viking helmets, and one wore an obviously bloody modern German officer's coat. None of them wore shoes or boots. None of them needed to carry a weapon. Clawed hands and gaping jaws filled with fangs and teeth more commonly seen in a wolf or lion's mouth. The one that used the kitchen door was the only one with a weapon. It had very odd-looking Viking axe strapped to its back. This creature and the weapon it carried seemed to drag at my attention as we fought off the monsters. It seemed almost different somehow, less animalistic. Where the others had a definite monstrous or animalistic gaze, it had a look of almost human intelligence to its eyes. The efforts at wearing clothing seemed to be an attempt at trying to look human, but they fell well short. The result was ruined by gray-blue tint of their skin, the evident length of their arms, and the filthy, ragged, and bloody condition of the clothes, and the way their jaws seemed to elongate when they screamed at us or bit into our downed comrades. They also didn't seem to know how to wear the clothes they put on. Some had arms stuck out of holes torn through the chest or the back of shirts, instead of out the sleeve. Pants were missing entire sections of leg, as if chewed through or torn off. The one wearing a Viking helmet appeared to have been shot by a bow or crossbow. The shaft and fletching still stuck out of the side of the helmet. We were not doing very well against them until we were able to bring our firearms into play. After that, they retreated quickly. They grabbed men they had already taken down and exited through the bay window. The one that caught my attention was the last to leave, turning to scream defiantly at us. The sergeant put a bullet into his forehead with his revolver. The creature almost appeared to fling itself backwards out of the kitchen door. A number of us ran to the shattered front window, some of us screaming and looking for our lost men. Most of us just firing into the dark blindly, hoping to kill at least one more of them. Sergeant got us under control, telling us to stop wasting ammunition. We checked the perimeter of the house and found nothing. The sergeant began cursing violently at the kitchen door. The one he had obviously killed was nowhere in sight. We could see where it landed, but there was no drag marks or blood visible by the light streaming out the farmhouse windows. None of us understood what was going on. We were all panicking. The sergeant was able to get us under control and working productively. We quickly boarded up the shattered window and then proceeded to shutter and board up all the others. We even collected what gear we had and began assessing our supplies. The sergeant had us take care of any wounded and get some rest, setting up 3 groups of 5 men for watch. After losing the lieutenant and 4 others, we were left with 15 men and the sergeant ended up in charge. I got the second watch with the sergeant, 2 other privates, and this sharpshooter out of a town called Newton in northern New Jersey. We called him Snuggles, for the way he scrunched down into himself when he slept. When it was our time to find our billets, I dropped off, watching the fire crackle in the fireplace, hearing the sergeant discussing whether we would be moving out in the morning. I'll admit that I had nightmares. Along with the nightmares, I had a dream I remembered quite clearly when I woke up. I dreamed about the time from my childhood when an old German couple used to take care of me. My father and mother ran a gun and hunting shop. My father was a gunsmith and a hunting guide, and my mother would clerk for their shop and tend to the customers' orders that would come in for my father's handcrafted firearms. They would also take groups of city folks out during the hunting season, small game, deer, or bear, for weekend forays. It was during those trips and at a time when I was too young to tag along that I got to know the Zaberas. They would watch over me during the weekend hunting trips. I enjoyed the time I spent with the Zaberas. They would tell me stories and let me stay up late. I would get to have all kinds of treats. Mrs. Zaber was an excellent cook, and in the tradition of German housewives, she enjoyed making pastries and other desserts. Mr. Zaber would take me into his study and read to me from an enormous collection of books. As I grew older and the babysitting became less necessary, I would visit the Zabers and do chores for them that they probably could have completed themselves, but left for me as an excuse for my visits. I would then get a treat of strudel or other delicious pastry out of Mrs. Zaber's kitchen. I would also be allowed to borrow any book I wanted from Mr. Zaber's library. I read a lot of tragedies, folk tales, horror stories, myths, and books of philosophy in those days. The dream was about one of the times I spent at the Zaber's home. We were sitting in their study. I was sitting before the fireplace, drinking hot cocoa and listening to Mr. Zaber tell stories about the old country. The Zabers were first-generation immigrants. They came to America in 1855. They were freshly married and settled on a farm leased from one of a Dutch family just outside of Lancaster. I'm pretty sure they grew tobacco. They moved to the house I knew shortly after the Civil War. They had lost both their sons to the war, and a daughter died of pneumonia during her teens. They had no living family and treated me as a surrogate grandchild, going so far as to naming me as their sole heir. The story I was being told was a fairy tale about man-eating monsters. I remember thinking about how the story reminded me of the stories of ghouls and zombies. Mrs. Zaber said that yes, a lot of the monsters seem to repeat within the myths of the world. Shape changers, vampiric powers, ghosts, haunts, giants, mischievous spirits, and so forth. He applauded me for noticing the resemblance and quirks within the myths. I didn't realize at the time why the praise was so important to Mr. Zaber and his wife. I remembered that the hero had tried to use his spear and sword to defeat the monster, but failed. The creature had come crashing through the hall's main doors, screaming and flinging warriors out of its way, eventually reaching the hero, who had been enjoying a celebration, was at least half a barrel into his mead cup. The hero, of course, appeared to be able to meet his end. He had lost his sword, and the creature had snapped his spear in half, proving ineffectual as the creature grappled with him and rolled about in front of the hall before the main hearth. The hero eventually received a lucky break as the monster rolled him close enough to the fire pit for him to grasp a flaming log, which he proceeded to use to beat the monster off of himself. The monster backed off enough for the other warriors to come to the hero's aid, at which point he commanded them all to take up flaming brands and attack the creature, burning the monster by using the flaming logs to beat it into the fire pit itself. Consumed by the flames, the monster was unable to revive itself. I woke up with startling clarity, realizing precisely what we needed to do to destroy the monsters that attacked us. We had no giant fire pit to burn the monsters in, but we could effectively create one in a day. We also had plenty of flammable materials at hand, which we could use to make makeshift incendiary weapons. I was fairly certain the monsters wouldn't be coming for us again until nightfall, if not later. And I was even more certain that they would keep coming for us till we were all dead. I took all of a few moments to convince the sergeant of what we needed to do. After what we had witnessed the night before, getting him to try my idea was not that difficult. It only took an hour to get the others to cooperate. We had half of the remaining men collecting digging tools from the barn to dig our pit just outside the entrance to the barn. The snow mercifully slackened enough that we were able to clear it quickly with buckets of boiled water tossed liberally about the side yards, softening the dirt enough to clear. The other half of the men were sent scavenging for flammable materials, straw, loose kindling, and wood. Even the bed sheets and other linen were gathered up. The sergeant had any flammable liquid collected, and kerosene was salvaged from every lamp we could find on the property. One of the farm boys we had in the squad suggested we search the barns and outbuildings for chemicals that could burn. We found the ingredients for making some highly flammable chemicals and even found some quicklime by the farmstead smithy. We completed our preparations well before midday, and all we could do was wait for night to come. Once full dark had descended, we did not wait long before the next attack. The monsters came through a window on the second floor this time, and we started abandoning the farmhouse in an orderly retreat. They attempted to catch us by using the two stairwells that led to the second floor. The main stairwell led from the front room area, which we had been using as our main access to the second floor. The other stairwell came down behind the small door off the kitchen. Realizing it would be a problem for us when we tried to make our exit, we had blocked it off earlier that day. We were right. They almost had the sergeant and me. We were going to be the last out the door. Again, it was the one that carried the battle axe that did the surprising thing. Instead of taking the easy route to the front room, it came down the kitchen stairwell with two other creatures. Startling our corporal, he ran out the kitchen door, leaving the sergeant and me without cover. The sergeant used the butt of his rifle to whack the face of one carrying the battle axe and knocked it back against the other two. That gave us enough time to scramble back through the entrance to the front room. The creatures in the front room were rummaging through the gear we had left behind, looking at it and sniffing everything they yanked out. We ran past two before they even realized we were in the room. I hit the front door at speed, slamming my shoulder against the left side, aiming just above the doorknob, hoping to pop the latch. Our plan was ruined by this point. We now had no clue which direction these creatures were going to be exiting the farmhouse from. The corporal had effectively doomed the sergeant and I. We made a run for the kitchen side of the house, hoping that we could salvage the plan. It was the men we had set to wield the torches and firebombs that found the practical solution to our new problem. They started setting the farmhouse on fire. A solution I might not have considered, and certainly one the sergeant wasn't happy with, as a lot of our gear and supplies were still inside. But the men were committed to the action before we could get all the way around to the kitchen door. They began circling the building using flaming logs, our higher-powered rifles, and the makeshift firebombs to force any of the creatures trying to escape the fire back into the house. It seemed to be working out quite well. We had no choice but to finish the job. We would lose some of our gear, but we could try to recoup some of our equipment from the barn. Only one of the monsters was crafty enough to evade our entrapment efforts. I was starting to wonder about the one carrying the strange battle axe. It might have gone right back up those kitchen stairs. Moments after we had most of the first floor set ablaze, it came out of a third-floor attic window. The man covering that section went down quickly. The creature split the man's chest open with its battle axe. Before running off into the woods, we quickly added 2 extra men to that section as the sergeant and the medic tried to triage the downed man. The rest of the creatures were kept from escaping the flames through the strength of our firepower and determination not to have to deal with these things more than we already had. By morning, the farmhouse was a smoldering ruin. We had lost only the one man, and no more creatures escaped the inferno. The sergeant decided that we should track down and dispose of the last creature. I was going along no matter the circumstances. The corporal was left in charge, and our sharpshooter Snuggles volunteered to go along with us. We expected a 3-man team could effectively deal with the last surviving creature, knowing what we now knew about the creatures. We grabbed as many of our makeshift firebombs that were left and a couple of pre-made torches. The thing's path was easy enough to follow. Snuggles led the way. The sergeant went second, and I was rear guard. It was the obvious line-up as far as the sergeant was concerned. Snuggles was the best shot, and along with me, the most comprehensively trained tracker and hunter. For 3 hours, we followed the trail through the surrounding pine forest and up into the foothills that enclosed the valley where the farmhouse was located. The trail was very easy to follow in the snow, and Snuggles attempted to guarantee that the creature didn't pull a switchback and come at us from behind or from the blind side. During our last break to check our back trail, the sergeant and I discussed our options once we got rid of the last creature. I suggested a week to recuperate and salvage gear, but he stood firmly on moving us out of the immediate area as soon as we could get our things together and our wounded up and moving. I look back on that moment, and I should have been surprised that the sergeant was discussing our next move with a private who had celebrated his 17th birthday ducking whiz-bangs and minis in the trenches of the French countryside. I am at this very moment reassessing all the times I have talked clients into letting me do some strange things with little to no objection on their part, and it just overwhelms me. People just seem to want to trust us, users of the arcane, that is. Maybe I'll make a study of it, find out if it's a common factor. Think about it, kid. One of us talked some lord's illegitimate kid into pulling a heavy-ass sword from a stone when no one else could do it. And when the sword was broken, he convinced the same kid that some woman in the middle of a lake would give him a replacement. And that is just the most famous of the stories about people who use the arcane. That's the end of chapter 3. That's all I'm going to give you. You want to read more, you got to buy the book. Any questions, anyone? If anything, I'm gonna move, guys. I'm gonna go into my my lobby in my voice channel. If you guys want to pop into my Discord's lobby, since it closed my frickin' event, and you guys can join me there. I'm gonna take a quick break, let my dogs out, and I'll be right back. List any questions, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Be right back, guys. Okay, everybody, I'm back. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions at all? I'm scrolling up through to see if I missed anything from you guys. Give me a second while I read. Hello, hello. Hello to everybody who came, by the way. Thank you for showing up. You're fine, Queen. You're fine. You can always rewatch it. If anybody showed up late, you can always, like, listen to it, since there's no actual, like, there's kind of no video. It's just, the book cover with my HTTP link for the book. Well, I'm leaving, and Burb, I am going to be leaving this up. No, Burb, you can send questions here. Brittany, no, technically this is my second book. And it's the first book is nothing like this one. The first book I put out was last summer, July 1st, and it is a Dungeons and Dragons sword and sorcery monsters source book for dungeons, but it has a short story built in. And actually, if you guys want, I will read you something from that. If you guys are interested in hearing that, I can read you a section of that book. Because it's actually got kind of funny little add-ins into it. Where's that? That's not it. Where is documents? If you want, I can read and I'll put up a... This will be part of a series. I plan to publish more than one book of this. It was originally an idea I came up with while living in Philadelphia, and being a lover of detective novels and sorcery novels, and the whole where we were seeing all these books come out, like the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, Anita Blake series by Laurel K. Hamilton, a whole bunch of occult / urban stuff where the main character was a detective or an investigator or a cop, and they were dealing with the supernatural. So but they were all written in a specific style that I kind of found I loved them. I still love them, but you knew the main character was going to survive because they were talking to somebody. And at no point, like in the old detective novels, like the old Sam Spades and stuff, you knew he was writing his memoirs or his journals about the cases he did. In the Agatha Christie novels, you knew she was, they were writing it, they were being told from her point of view because she had everybody's, like, the whole, like, you have the detective in the room with all the victims, or not the victims, but all the people who were guilty, like the movie Knives Out, where the detective's in the room with all the bad people, and he starts calling them out for all their shit. So that was like, so there was no audience for the storyteller. who is the the main character. So I went, well, I love the style, but it's not quite what I. Nowhere during it, you can rewatch, re-listen, rewatch, and you're gonna get. I'm gonna read the first chapter of my, or I'm gonna read the first part of my other book that I also have out. If you like sword and sorcery stuff, this is my sword and sorcery book called Adventurers Digest: How Not to Crawl in a Dungeon. The link is also in my description. It's it's under buy my book and is order my new book. And then my book listings on Barnes and Nobles. And before I read this next book selection, I do want to put out special thanks to guys that got me to do YouTube, really do YouTube. I had my friend Chaz, who did the artwork for my first book. He wanted to do YouTubes, and I couldn't get myself to do them. I was very depressed at that point in time. Last spring, I found I had skin cancer, so I was having a complete mental freak out. Last year was kind of rough for me, and discovering the Redline community helped out a lot. But to finish answering Verb's question, I planned originally to have 5 books in this series that spanned from the spring of 1932 to the summer of 1966, or not 1936. So it'd be 1932, 33, 34, 35, 36. And in each book would be 4 cases. That's the other thing that bugged me, is that when you try to read the entire series of books, you were never, like, the time frame kind of got weird in some of the book series. Like, is it, what year are they in now? Is like, because they never quite name the year in a lot of their books. I name my year because I'm writing historical fiction set in an urban fantasy universe. So my books will have a definite start and beginning. There will be 4 cases, so each case will have a number, and then eventually book 1 through 4 will be put into a compilation. There will be like a compilation book of the first 4 cases, which will be the year 1932. It'll be the Scomp testimonies, numbers 1 through 4, 1932 number, cases number 1 through 4, and then the Scomp testimonies, 1933 book, cases 5 through 5, 6, 7, 8. So on and so forth, for a total of 20 cases. And each case will be during a specific time of the year and deal with different events that actually happened in history. There were a lot of things going on in the 30s that people don't quite realize. There's a reason why H.P. Lovecraft's stuff did so well in the 30s. There's a reason why Indiana Jones has that weird kind of feel that it's almost reality, because it was reality. There were archaeologists working for the United States government going to other countries to collect, steal archaeological finds for the United States, because at the same time, the Nazis, the Italians, and the Greeks, and the French, and the Spanish were all sending out and doing archaeological digs to promote their own agendas. The Nazis were trying to prove they all descended from the Aryans. The Italians were trying to prove that because we are number one. We are the birth of democracy. That's Italy's. That was Mussolini's big thing. We are the place of the birth of democracy. We're number one, which is why we have the Colosseum, why we have all this stuff in Rome dug up, why we have Pompeii found, Herculaneum found. They were gone. Nobody knew where they really were. It took Mussolini, one of the most hated leaders of Italy, and one of the 3 that made up the triumvirate of the Axis powers in World War II, he was one of the worst. He was, he was up there with Hitler. Hitler was trying to prove the Aryans came, the German people came from the Aryans, which is why he was sending everybody to Egypt and stuff like that. But he was also sending people to South America and to China and to other countries to steal stuff and he was sending scientists and archaeologists and historians to other countries' museums to steal from those museums. There are cases that weren't massively broadcast, like not many people, if you do a lot of Google searching, which I've done, that don't know. In America, the Natural History Museum attempted to be robbed and was robbed a couple of times during the 1930s by foreign spies. There were scientists from other countries who were sent here by those countries to get into those museums as an employee and pillage what we'd already stolen. For the Germans, it was Egyptian stuff, anything that would prove Hitler's agenda, and Himmler's agenda, because he was all about the German people going back, like that whole North mythology stuff that he liked. The Italians were sending us people here to get back stuff or get stuff that were taken out of Italy by rich people during the after Civil War, 1870s forward to the 1930s, because during the Great Depression, the rich hid their wealth by buying works of art and other historical stuff, because gold became illegal to own in America. The government could come into your house and take any amount of, any gold over a certain amount, they could take. It's still, to this day, illegal to own a gold bar over a certain size. You go to those gold things in Alaska and out in the, in other, I think it's Kentucky, you can do gold farm. There's gold mines that a civilian can go to and work for a summer. You pay to go, and you can work and earn gold. Those you actually don't get. If you find a large nugget, if it's over a certain weight, you can't keep it. It's against the law. It's been that way since the Great Depression, because America had no gold to. Yeah. That was George Clooney did the. That was after. Those were the was it Minutemen? No. It's actually Monument Men. Those were the Monument Men. Those were American soldiers who, during the final rush to push the Germans out of other countries, where the Germans were evacuating and destroying art and hiding art. They were sent to reclaim art, and they didn't recover it all. There's great works of art that are just gone. And some they found later, like in the 50s and 60s, when they raided houses in South America, in Argentina, and places like that, where they found out some high-ranking German officers had hidden, and German scientists like Mengele had hidden there. They found works of art that were believed to have been lost. Yeah, the Monument Men was a true story about a group of historians who were drafted into the military to try to get ahead of the American push into Germany to recover stolen artwork and give it back to the families. And they were still trying to give back some of the artwork to families. They haven't given it all back. It's sitting in museums because they can't find a relative who can prove 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are actually a relative. You need proof. The problem is most of that proof is stuck in some Swiss account somewhere. There's entire families that lost all their money when the Germans took over whatever country they originally were living in. They're now like fighting the Swiss bank because the Swiss bank is built on Nazi gold and stolen money. It's something the Swiss bank does not like admitting. There's accounts that the Swiss stole from families because the Germans killed the owners of that account, and their relatives have nothing to prove that they're actually relatives 100% beyond a shadow of doubt because the Germans destroyed all proof and were, as the government of that country, claiming the money. So now Swiss are like, oh no, you got to be up. No, there's a whole bunch of shit that goes on in that. But my book is set between 1932 and 1936. I'm going to have 4 cases, a total of 20 cases that William Scomp will tell the kid. And the whole point of him telling this kid, and that was the whole point of my book, was I want a character who's, because even in these modern detective stories, the detective gets his ass beat. Like all of the old detectives used to get, Sam Spade, all these guys used to get beat at murder attempts during the books. Agatha Christie's character is almost killed several times in her books. All those old detectives from the early part, like the 1920s and 30s detectives that everybody loves talking about, the TV series like Agatha Christie stuff, even Sherlock Holmes, almost killed in half the stories. Modern detective stories where it's the urban fiction, the heroes get their butts beat because either they're not quite as powerful as the people they're going out after, or they're straight up human dealing with monsters. So my character is a human dealing with a supernatural world. He gets his he tells a kid, you don't want to, like I stated, the quote, you don't want to look at me. Look how beat up I am. You really don't want to be me, kid. You don't want to be the hero. And, so he's telling these stories to the kid to prove how horrible his life was. No matter what they made it out to be like on the radio shows or, what he's seeing. Because, I mean, even your sports heroes, you ask them, was it worth it? Some of them will tell you, no. It was not worth being a paraplegic. No. No, I'm paralyzed from the neck down because of that last hit I took on the football field. Or, ask a boxer if it's, ask some of these boxers who ended up dying in their late 40s because they took so much head trauma and spent their 30s and 40s as like somebody who's suffering from Alzheimer's. Ask him if it was worth it. Ask him, was it worth that decade of fame? No, of course it's not. That's why they want all that money, because afterwards they need it to take care of themselves. But anyway, I'm gonna read because Brittany asked if this is my first book. It's not my first book. It's technically my second. The first book was published between me and me doing the writing, and my friend that I thanked in the beginning of my thing, Chaz, who did the artwork, and he pushed me to do the artwork. But before I start reading, I want to send out a special thanks to the following YouTubers because they helped me get through a year of shit. Just feeling really crappy about myself and about where my life was going. With my health and with the fact that stuff kind of went not quite right last year. Especially Azazel RP, Battery, FamLauren, Hitman Mike, JimboTBimbo, Just Havoc, Metal 64 Gear, OnlyLuke, OTB Ryry, SpaceGirl, and Elanip. Their streams and videos got me through a rough year, and joining you on Redline has been a boon to me and my storytelling spirit, my RP, my role playing and storytelling spirit. You guys brought me kind of like, I was almost just gonna say, F it, I'm not writing anymore. But getting with those guys really helped. I would also like to thank Clutch Lowcat56 for being a good sport and letting me hang with him and inspiring the character I currently play while streaming GTA 5 RP FiveM on Redline. Because without, Clutch, I probably would have never tried. But I would also like to thank directly Elanip for, putting stuff on Facebook because he got me interested. Detective Elite Prime, Elite. The week before I put in, I caught one of his live stream and I posted in his thing. I did the whole the super chat, and said, I've got a new computer. I've got GTA 5 and FiveM. Still anxious about filling out an application to Redline. Got any advice? And he told me, just do it. Fill out the application. Put everything you can into the application. What's the worst that could happen? You get denied. Then you just try again after however long they tell you have to wait. Or if you try somewhere else, you might have better chances. You might have better time in some other server. We are not the only server out there, but we are one of the best. And he's right. They are. Redline is one of the most inclusive and supportive servers I've seen for RP. Even Atlanta State, says just do it, just fill it out. I also want to thank Joey UK for approving my application. And Lum and Raj for doing my interview and bearing with me through my nervousness and my tendency to blather on. Because I do have 40 plus years of role-playing game experience. Social role-playing games have been a large part of my life for the last 40 years, since I was 7 years old. I turned 48 on June 19th. And I'm going to announce today, I'm going to do a 12-hour... I'm going to try to do the longest stream I've ever done. And I have to look and see. I'm going to try to. Hopefully my internet holds out. But I'm going to stream all day long. Going to do as long as I can. Probably breaks every 2-3 hours. And I'll play a few different games. Hopefully I can play a couple of new ones on my birthday. But I'll be doing a very long birthday stream. On the 12th of June, which is Grandpa Rob's birthday and my dad's birthday, I'm going to try to do a long stream. Other than that, guys, I'm going to read the first chapter, quote unquote, of my other book. It is a sword and sorcery source book for role players to use in their tabletop role-playing games. This, again, is not PC or child-oriented. Be prepared to be on or, oh my god, that's so wrong. All right? Title of my original first book is Adventurers Digest, How Not to Crawl in the Dungeon. Written by Jeremy R. Shepard, artwork by CG. Adventurers Digest is going to be another book series. It will be my catch-all book series. I'm going to be putting out, I'm hoping to eventually turn it into a brand where it will be a book series that you're going to get a compilation book, or the forward will always tell like what the book is about, of course, but it's written in a specific kind of style, and you'll see as I go. Okay, author's introduction. The following is a selection of excerpts from a diligently, precisely, and unabashedly honest written record of the exploits surrounding one Sebastian Potholer, a professional dungeon crawler and instructor, and his dungeon crawler course field trip to Frog Lake Manor. The material was originally published in a university course book intended to be used as a substitute for Sebastian Potholer as an instructive manual for this particular dungeon crawler course. A certain amount of concern was being shown by the university concerning Magister Potholer's teaching style and the number of deaths during his course's field trip final. This work is presented in chronological order by myself, Master Bard and Chronicler Bertolf Fairburn. In accordance with the university contract, I audited the course using my ring of unobtrusiveness. I followed along with Magister Potholer's students, observing and recording with no intentions of participating with the coursework. A small blurb containing basic information about these students is concluded prior to the actual necessary coursework material to provide context for the narrative. Please be aware that this editorial is only a partial work and does not contain all that occurred within the dungeon of Frog Lake Manor or within the course book. The intent of this editorial is to present creatures that have not been widely disseminated beyond the halls of learning or the partially believed stories in Taproom and Guildhall. Now, I have, there are in the text, there are footnotes. I will read the 3 footnotes for this first page. Oh, I gotta... Sorry, I gotta use that stupid... Oh, come on. Sorry, guys. This was not part of the original plan, so... I gotta scan all the way to the end of the freaking book. Okay, footnote number 1, in reference to Sebastian Potholer. Although finding a substitute has been difficult since the publication and success of the course book, it could be the fact that it is renowned that only the Magister's arm was recovered during the field trip that was used as the source for the course book. Footnote number 2, in reference to the Ring of Unobtrusiveness. The Ring of Unobtrusiveness is a personal item that I had commissioned earlier on in my career. While not a true ring of invisibility, it does effectively negate intrusion into my personal space while working as a chronicler. Footnote number 3. Also, the university contract was a little light on royalties and needed to pay down my tavern and lodging bills, in reference to why he's published this work. I want to go back to page. There we go. Okay. All right. I'm going to skip the descriptions of the characters. I'm going to go straight to the description of the location, Frog Lake Manor. Because this is the beginning of the narrative, the actual narrative of the author, Berthold Fairbairn, chronicler Berthold Fairbairn. Frog Lake Manor. Magister Potholer had set a fairly early start time for this particular field trip. He requested that all participants meet at the tavern station at sunrise and to make sure that we had provisions for at least one full day. As each participating apprentice arrived, I conducted a brief interview and explained my presence. Magister Potholer arrived on time and proceeded to explain the day's field trip once all had gathered in the travel compartment. Morning, everyone. All returned his greeting with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Right. Well, as you all know, we are doing the required field exercise to complete this course. Mild applause. Yes, we are going to be going to a dungeon for some practical experience training. Master Bertolf Fairbairn is here to record that training. I gave a bit of a bow. You know what? I'm going to do something real quick so that I can read off these footnotes. Oh, well, let me duplicate it. That sucks. I was hoping I could open it twice, but I can't. At that, there is a footnote for that page. I should be able to go to a specific page. But of course it's not going to let me. Whatever. What is going on here? Sorry, guys. I had to speed scroll to the last page, and then it's a problem with reading from a secondary document. Footnote number 10, as per my contract, I did not allow Magistrate Potholer to draw me out. I was instructed to do a short interview of each participant, join the group on their field trip, and make sure I was able to return with the record of the day. You know what? I know where I can open it. Oh, I'll get you, you stupid frickin'. Half a second, guys. I'm going to open my original document. Because it's got my... I can read my footnotes as they happen, not the stupid way the book's got them set up. Okay. Okay, that close that. Alexandria, raise your hand. Sir? Yes, Dame Alexandria, isn't it? Squire Alexandria, actually. Sir, passing this course will earn me the honor of claiming my full knighthood. Again, mild applause from the peanut gallery. Where are we going for our practical training? Excellent question. We are going to Frog Lake Manor. No responses from the peanut gallery this time, except for some quizzical expressions. Footnote number 11. Frog Lake Manor has a particular reputation. One I was fully aware of, but due to my contract, I did not mention. Adventurers nicknamed it Mimic Massacre Mansion, and was a well-known dungeon in its day, well-known for ending the lives of many adventurers. Magister Pollard looked around, gave a nod, and continued. A little background on Frog Lake Manor. It was once a lord's seat on the edge of the mountain range that borders our western border. Apparently, during construction of the main house, the lord discovered caverns beneath the construction location. He decided they would make excellent storage rooms, wine cellars, dungeons, etc. Magister Potholer gave an abrupt, dry chuckle. What he made was the perfect environment for adventurers to gain a bit of coin. Since the day after the first monster ate a page sent down to get a bottle of the Lord's favorite vintage, adventurers have made a good living trying to reclaim the manor from the monsters. After a huge dungeon crawl party was sent in to clear out the monsters of the estate, the estate was purchased from the Lord's family. Footnote number 2, connected to the purchase from the Lord's family. Magister Potholer failed to mention that the Lord led the raid and didn't return with the survivors, which was what prompted the sale. The raid was only able to reduce the monster's population, not expunge it completely. Freelance adventurers are no longer allowed to enter the dungeon without paying the university, and is primarily used as a training course for adventurers looking to formally advance. Again, Potholer gave his little chuckle. We experienced adventurers quickly learned taking in a group to train actually paid pretty well. A whistle blew as the transit stopped. The doors opened to the compartment. Ah, we're here, everyone. I gathered my gear, slipped on my ring, and discreetly followed the group towards the gate compound. Entry 1. Creatures of the Mimic Massacre Mansion. Goblix. Goblix are a vampiric dungeon crawl species that uses mimicry to hunt. Goblix will commonly disguise themselves as a cup, a mug, a goblet, or other form of beverage container. Description. In their disguised form, they can appear as any beverage container. No single type of container is standard. Their age and strength can be determined by material that they appear to fashion from. While most goblets do not tend to stray from their first form, the material that they are made out of does change over time. Platinum, newborn, under a year. Gold, infant. Silver, youngster. Brass/copper, young adult. Glass or crystal, mature breeding adult. Wood or bone, elder. Clay or stone, ancient. While their age can determine the material of the beverage container, they will often be quite ornate in appearance. The tendency to lose embedded precious stones or intricate design work is a signal of a molting stage beginning. If this is happening to a goblet with clay or stone appearance, this is a sign of the goblet's imminent expiration. Where they are found and how to find them. Goblets can be found in most dungeons that contain any areas that would be described as settled by sapient beings. Goblets are not capable of self-propulsion. They use a unique form of teleportation that requires them to feed first. It is unclear how these creatures came to use the form of a beverage containers. But what is also not known is how they reproduce, as no spawn are found near even the mature adults. Finding a goblet is as simple as discovering a cup, goblet, glass, mug, etc., with water within it in an abandoned ruin. How they feed. This is where it gets gross, guys. A goblet requires a sapient being to feed. First, the individual must discover the goblet where it waits, often in plain sight on any number of surfaces in a dungeon. They have also been found next to the decayed remains of their victims. Usually, this is the case for the older goblets, as their movement abilities have decreased with age. Once discovered and the goblet is picked up, a contact-based subconscious compulsion is released by the goblet. This compulsion has two parts. First, a lowering of general fear response that the presence of a predator sets off. Second, implanting an urge to drink the liquid contained in the goblet. This liquid is a paralytic saliva produced by the goblet, spelled Goblik, that causes almost instantaneous paralysis. The first compulsion also makes sure that the victim is too slow to notice the paralytic. Once paralyzed, the goblet becomes a more animate creature. Clawed appendages come out of the goblet and grasp whatever the victim has used to pick up the goblet. A barbed tongue will snake out of the well of the container and push down into the victim's throat. Once the goblet's tongue has reached the desired depth, it will send out its spiked barbs and begin to drink the vital fluids of its victim. How to kill. Goblets are not difficult to kill. A strong enough willpower can notice the compulsion sent out by the goblet. The resulting feedback result in a preemptive attempt by the goblet to feed. Simply throwing the goblet away from oneself and stabbing it with a blade or smashing it with a blunt object from a distance works well. If a goblet has had the opportunity to poison their victim with the paralytic, then the only course that is open to the victim is for a party member to get to them before the feeding begins, or that the goblet is a quick eater. If the goblet can be removed before feeding begins, then the application of a blade or bludgeoning weapon is sufficient to kill the creature, as well as timely introduction of some kind of anti-paralytic to the victim. Encounter. Now this is where the story comes in, guys. This is why I said it's kind of a different kind of source book for monsters. I describe encounters with these monsters. Once at the manor, Magister Potholder gathered all the participants together in the basement entrance to the dungeon. He proceeded to instruct them, detailing what would be the most beneficial to an adventurer most beneficial to an adventurer and their party to carry with them into a dungeon. He had the apprentices open and show their packs to him, complimenting, questioning, and asking them discard or at least store unnecessary items in the conveniently provided storage lockers. Footnote number 14. These lockers get emptied once a month or when no free lockers are available for incoming adventurers to use. When Magister Potholder is running the course, the second happens more often than the first. Cycling through the vault-like doorway into the dungeon proper, Magister Potholder stopped in the first room off the main entrance for one final cautionary statement. Don't just grab anything while we're in the dungeon, began Magister Potholder. Twitch, snark dripping off every pore, asked, why not? Isn't that the reason we're going to the dungeon? To loot? Magister Potholder turned about to face the group, frustrated at being interrupted. True, obviously. Other than surviving to get the items back out again. Smirks and tittered laughter echoed through the mostly empty room. But don't just grab everything. Think about it. Stuff could be cursed, connected to traps. And then there's the goblets. Alexandria tilted her head a bit, looking curiously at Magister Potholder. Goblets? What's goblets? Vohm almost appeared to glow with interest. Looking up from the scroll, he had been scratching out the dimensions of the room. Ryro can't seem to understand where the conversation was going. What about them? I can usually get at least a silver for a good brass or pewter one. Magister Potholder pinches the bridge of his nose before continuing. No. Goblets. Okay? So, okay. Picks up a wooden goblet from a nearby table. See this goblet? Looks nice and innocent. Just sitting here on the table. Filled to the brim with cool, clear water. We've been killing dungeon lurkers, skeletons, and such for hours. What's the harm of just taking a big old swig to quench your thirst? He gives a little shrug and questioning frown. Except, he holds up a single finger on his unoccupied hand. The water is actually a kind of paralytic potion. Actually, the creature's spit. You swig. You get paralyzed. And then the barbed tongue comes out of the cup and snakes down your throat, burrows through your chest to your heart and other organs, and drinks you dry. Group stares horrified. And they can look as innocent as this wooden goblet, be as bejeweled as a kingly chalice, or fine as a crystal wine glass. The fancier they are, the younger they are. And that is why you don't just grab any cup or goblet off a table in a dungeon with water in it and take a swig. Cheers! At this point, the group had their first encounter at Mimic Massacre Mansion. For their instructor had the misfortune of grabbing an actual goblet. Apparently, a very ancient one. The creature appeared to be of very basic make. Wooden, with little to no decoration. Magister Potholder had Ryro to thank for his survival. His quick spell work incapacitating the creature. Ryro had cast a freezing spell at the hand that Magister Potholder was holding the goblet in, freezing it and the paralytic liquid before any could be ingested by Magister Potholder. Once Magister Potholder's hand had been separated from the goblet with the careful application of a cudgel, Ragless utilized her magic and herbalist skills to treat him. The group proceeded on deeper into the dungeon. By the way, that's the first book. That's the theme. You get told about a creature. You get told about how horrific the damn thing is. And then they encounter one in game. Or in the story. And that's the whole book. 12 monsters. that are described by the chronicler. And that's just the first book. I have plans for about 15 more, which will be used to basically world build a sword and sorcery world, which I hope to one day turn into a MMORPG with enough backing and possibly sell it. I don't know if I'd contemplate hiring my own people to do the programming, but more than likely I'm going to sell it. Sell the idea after I've gotten my world history created, so that the it's goblick verb. It's basically goblet and lick. Basically, it's anything in this dungeon can actually kill you. We have some pretty fun stuff too. It's stuff that's just like, that is so wrong. That's just, no, you can't do that. And like, why not? We invented it for the idea for dungeon masters that are just tired of their players ignoring them or just doing petty stuff and like completely ignoring what the DM's telling them and doing stupid things. It's like, here's how to torture your players. My second book in that genre, in that world, is a not users, what do you call those books? Not a blue book. It's the book you get if you want to know about products coming out. Buyer's Guide. So the first book is a monster manual, a description of creatures that you could run across in random dungeons. The second book is a buyer's guide, where my chronicler, Bertolf, takes charge of the people of the party that survived the first adventure, as they go into a witch's bazaar, where you can buy magical items and unique adventuring tools. And he proceeds to take them through the market going, oh, cool, look at this. And oh, cool, look at that. And also in that book, I build the description and basis for my legal system for the adventurers in my world. A legal system that will actually be part of the MMORPG. Where, if your character breaks a law in the game, like kill a civilian or, steal from players or steal from a store and get caught doing it, you can actually be put on trial. And the trial it's pretty cool. The way I did it, it's a combination of a couple of ideas. Has some influence from the game ArcAge, but other games have also used the judges, the player judges system. So it's based, concept of player judges, and you have to basically explain yourself to get out of trouble. And the third book is going to be a city guide, but unlike other city guides that you can get, will be, like a city guide will go, okay, you want to go to see this, if you want to get the best burgers in town, you go here. If you want to find the best art, you go here. Oh, don't forget to check out this, historical monument and that historical monument. This is the best, this is the best area to go and get, a hot beverage in the morning, that kind of crap, right? My city guide will be a while your regular city guides will tell you go here to get your best burger or whatever, like whatever food, like your best steak or your best ale, we will tell you, yes, great steak, great oil, great ale. And if you go into the back room and down the back stairwell, you'll find the local black market. So it literally will be a way to navigate for players all the good or bad things in the city, is the best way to put it. Like, if you want your character to find the local black market, all you have to do is find this bar, because the black market is in the basement of the bar. Through this side door, you gotta know a knock and all that shit. And oh, yes, by the way, while the aqueducts are one of the best features of the city, avoid going down this stairwell along the aqueducts while it looks like a pleasant walk while it looks like an entrance to a beautiful an architecturally beautiful archway to the lower levels of this part of the city. It is actually an entrance to a dungeon. So it tells you how to get to the dungeon of the town, which is the sewers. And the sewers will be full of monsters that adventurers have picked up in their travels and decided, the whole alligator in the sewer thing. Well, we thought it would be kind of cute, but it got a little too big, so we just set him free. Yes, occasionally, an adventurer will discover that the robin's egg they thought they picked up happened to be really a basilisk egg, and it's now, and when it hatched, they kind of freaked out and chucked it, and it's now living in the dungeon. So you find out, like, adventurers and travelers have unintentionally released a bunch of monsters into the city sewers. And that there is a beautiful arch and stairway near an aqueduct channel that leads to the dungeon. And every other sewer entrance in the city will have a proper lock and gate where you can't get in. It will be one location you can get in, and an entrance you can get out, which is not an exit you can get out, but which is not the entrance. Yeah, effectively, Verb. That's where the idea came from. Is that if to find the black market, you have to know where to go, and it's not going to be like but it'll also tell you oh yes, this library is one of the greatest libraries in the nation. Blah blah blah. And if you go down, if you want to find like a book of scrolls on, like if you want to find like stuff that will actually be helpful to you, you want to go down this back alley, 3 doors down. Not look for the window that's just top to bottom full of books. Go in, be very careful moving through the aisles, as a simple bump of a stack could cause an avalanche that will bury you where you'll never be found until the books have finished eating you. Kind of thing, where it's like the best place to get your scrolls as a wizard or your magic stuff is some back alley or your side street. Probably not a back alley, probably a side street bookstore that is crammed into this tiny little place. And there's an actual bookstore in New Orleans that I base it off of, where you walk in and he's got books stacked just floor to ceiling, a good 12 feet tall, in crates and boxes and and shelving units, and books stacked on the floor, where if you don't take your time getting the book out, you could cause an avalanche in the store. And I thought, it was like, oh my god, this is like a magic bookshop. But I do hope you guys enjoyed everything. I'm gonna take a break. You guys have a good day. Let's see if there's anybody live right now. Actually, let's do a Dark Thought Games book read. Let's rate Swifty. Where's my copy link? Where's my copy link? Copy link address? Oh no, full AAA 3D. A kind of a combination of. I would love to see it on the quality of EverQuest Online, or maybe not EverQuest. Elder Scrolls, not EverQuest. Elder Scrolls Online. I would love to see it be like Elder Scrolls Online, but I would be happy with quality even coming close to GTA 5 Online or FiveM. Let's all do a Dark Thought book raid on Swifty. All the three of us. But if you have any other questions, you can send if you got a bunch of questions, if you want to send them to me through I don't mind if you want to send personal ping. Why can't I hear anything? Yeah, have a good one, Verb.